I have about 12 years experience deploying anything Apple, and I've been in lots of odd situations where some of my clients that I was consulting with didn't want to spend money on an MDM, handed devices out like they were candy to everybody, and there was no inventory or anything like that. So the purpose of this session here is to kind of present some lessons learned, some best practices, and some new tools that are out there to hopefully help you guys in your environment. Within the first year of my deployment, I was able to get 300 iOS devices deployed into Jamf Pro that were previously not managed at all. And that was a big leap with the staff members being able to convey the management to them and getting them to jump on board to having Big Brother on their device. It was something that it was a little bit of a battle, but something that we definitely got through. One thing that I was super proud of at the end of that deployment was that I was able to drop ship a device to somebody, have them turn it on, and be able to do everything themselves. Prior to that, I'll give you a little overview of what we were doing. In my former role, somebody would receive an iPad or an iOS device. They would fill out a little form requesting it, would come in the next day, and then they would make an appointment with me or one of the other IT specialists. We would sit down, we would walk them through. We'd set up about an hour and a half session walking them through getting their device ready. It was a pain in the butt, and it was a waste of a lot of time. So I kind of looked for something better, and I was like, how can we streamline this and make this a little bit more automated? My employer at that time did not want to proceed with an MDM. They didn't have money in the budget for it. It was something that just wasn't needed. So I did a little investigation, and I found Apple Configurator. So initially, we got about 200 devices enrolled into Apple Configurator. We got them all supervised. And is anybody here not familiar with Apple Configurator? Okay. So Apple Configurator, it's a free app. It's available on the App Store. It's actually called Apple Configurator 2 now. Apple Configurator 2 is essentially a free supervision utility. To dumb it down a little bit. With the Apple Configurator 2, you're able to push out configuration profiles and blueprints to be able to manage those devices. One big problem that we initially ran into when they were handing these devices out to people was passcodes and activation lock. Everything out there that people struggle with. And that was one thing that really helped me with Apple Configurator 2, since we weren't able to subscribe to an MDM provider. We were able to set a little token in Apple Configurator 2 to be able to clear that passcode if somebody lost it. And you might ask, why would somebody forget their passcode? They're using that device every day. Unfortunately, I was dealing with doctors and per diem employees that might not have used their iOS device for a couple weeks or even a couple months at a time, depending on when they got called in. So Apple Configurator worked great for about a year for our deployment. I was able to push out restrictions to be able to turn off the camera. I was able to push out restrictions so they couldn't download apps from the App Store. But it really wasn't what we needed, and we kind of needed a more full-blown solution, especially with our shared employees, like our nurses and some of the people in the PACU that would be traveling to different sites, and our hospice department. It was something that we really struggled with for a couple years, was being able to manage those shared devices. And it's something that even when I left, it was something that we still kind of struggled with, because we weren't able to just hand a device off at the end of shift to somebody without comfortably being able to know that their data on that device is gone without wiping it, which nobody has time to wipe the device at their end of their shift. So essentially you have two scenarios. So you got a personal device, which you're going to have your email on it, your calendar, your personal data, your pictures, and it's associated to you. But then you have shared roles where somebody might at the beginning of the shift pick up an iPod or an iPhone, and they might use that throughout their shift. At the end of the shift, they want to return it to another employee. That employee uses it for what they need to do. Some problems that you could run into that is maybe multiple departments are on a floor. They don't want to be having a cart just for nurses, a cart just for doctors, a cart just for nurses' aides. You want to be able to flip-flop those devices in between people. And that's something that the industry kind of struggled for a couple of years. So that's something that we'll touch on in a little bit about some new solutions that are out there that could help you with this. So is anybody out there not using MDM to manage devices at the moment, or not managing their iOS devices at all? Okay, so we got a couple people. That's good. So not a good thing if they're not being managed, but obviously you're here because you want to learn what's out there. Is there a particular reason why you're not managing your devices at the moment? Is it budget concerns pretty much?
We're brand new.
You're brand new? Okay.
I think just, not accepting the reality they're going to have to deal with Apple.
Okay. So yeah, that's something that a lot of organizations struggle with. Maybe when they start implementing this new technology, they might just purchase 1 or 2 devices, maybe less than 20, and they're like, you know what, we could kind of manage this on our own. I have some guy here who knows a little bit about tech. He's going to help me out with this. That's great. But what about if you want a little bit more control, a little bit more visibility? How many people out there use Excel spreadsheets to manage their device inventory? Couple people. Yeah. It's something that 5 years ago, if I asked that, everybody in the room would be putting up their hand. Excel spreadsheets are just a pain in the butt to deal with when it comes to inventory. So that's kind of why MDM and Apple School Manager and Apple Business Manager came out to kind of make lives a little bit easier for everybody. So when you're looking to deploy iOS devices, you got to take a couple things into consideration. Number one is, are you going to be using an MDM? If you're not, Apple Configurator is the way to go. It's free, again. You're not going to get all the advanced remote commands to be able to push out, but you're definitely going to be able to supervise that device and manage it a little bit better than you might be now with absolutely no management at all. The second thing is, are your devices and your purchasing program going to be tied into the Apple purchasing services like Apple School Manager and Apple Business Manager? Is anybody in here not familiar with Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager? Anybody not using them at the moment? Okay. So Apple School Manager, Apple Business Manager, they're free programs. You could sign up. If you have any questions, there's tons of people here from Apple that would be able to help you. But it's something that you could get signed up in, relatively under a day. There's a couple requirements for it. You want to make sure that number one, you have a valid work email address that's not tied to an existing Apple ID. And you want to be able to have somebody in your organization as a verification contact that can legally bind you into an agreement. And then the third is you're going to need your Dun & Bradstreet number, which you can find on the Dun & Bradstreet website. So, cool. So I'm going to open up Apple Configurator for those of you that aren't familiar with it, and I'm going to go over some of the little features in it. So this is Apple Configurator 2. Let me fix this so you guys can actually see it. Cool. So Apple Configurator 2, you're able to manage and mass update and deploy multiple devices at a time, especially if you have a nice hub that you're able to hook up to your device. My recommended solution is to have like a dedicated Mac Mini with a nice hub that you're able, little workstation that you could have all these devices plugged into. And the sole purpose of that Mac Mini is just to deploy devices. So when you open up Apple Configurator, first thing it's going to ask you for is to connect your devices. The devices get hooked up to the computer if you're a Lightning cable, and Apple Configurator 2 will recognize that device. But when that device is hooked up, you can't do anything with it yet. You could restore it, which will reach out to Apple. get software update, wipe the device, install the update, you got a fresh, clean iPad. That's about it, unless you set up Blueprint. So your blueprints, what they are, it's a predefined criteria of what you want that device to get. So I'm going to kind of walk through creating a blueprint in Apple Configurator 2. So we're going to click on New, and we're just going to name this particular one Basic Restrictions. So now we got our blueprint set up there that we could deploy out to a device. The only problem with it is that blueprint needs something to be associated with it, such as a config profile or something that you would want to push out with that. Let me. The screen's not working too well. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new profile in Apple Configurator. And this might look just like your MDM provider that you might be using today. If you're not familiar with MDM, this is a great place to explore the features of MDM. And you're going to see two particular things inside of here. You're going to see supervised and not supervised. Is anybody not familiar with supervision on iOS devices? Okay, so most of us. Okay, so when you're supervising an iOS device, you're taking responsibility of that device. Essentially, you can't supervise an iOS device without wiping it. So if you would hand me your device and I would say, hey, we want to put your work email on it, I can't just take your device, wipe it, supervise it without you knowing, because the device is going to be wiped. When it's supervised, you're able to get a lot more restrictions and a lot more features that you could use both in Apple Configurator and also in your MDM. So you might be able to remote wipe a device. You can do things like push out software updates to the device if it's supervised, whereas if it's not supervised, you're not going to be able to push out those updates. So.
Back up the device, wipe it, supervise it, and put the user contact.
You can. It's something that got a little bit easier over time. At first, that was something that was kind of hard to do, just because some of the steps that were involved, making sure all the data was transferred over successfully. But yeah, you can do that, and Apple Configurator actually allows you to back up the device right in Apple Configurator as well, essentially replacing iTunes, which is being sunsetted anyway. Yeah, good question.
Plug it in, back it up,
You could
wipe it, supervise it, and put the
and restore the backup all through Configurator. Yep. So the first thing you're going to want to do is just create a name for your config profile. And this is where people could get really in depth with these. I usually don't recommend creating a whole bunch of settings in a configuration profile, because if, for instance, your wireless would change and you push out another config profile, it might break that connection there for you. And that essentially, that definitely applies when you're using MDM. So I kind of I'm very basic with it. That way, number one, when I need to update something, it's a little bit easier for me to keep track of it. But you're going to want to create a name for your config profile. So I'm just going to make this one no camera. And then what I want to do is I want to set up a restriction to be able to disable the use of the camera and FaceTime. So I'm going to go into my restrictions, and I'm going to turn off the payload for the allow use of camera and allow FaceTime. And this is just a real basic dumbed down example. As you can see, there's tons of things that you could allow in here. You could say that the person's not able to notify their notification settings, or you don't want the user to be using Siri, iMessage, AirDrop. There's lots of great things that you could use in here, again, without having to have an MDM. Obviously, MDM's the standard and the way to go, but I've been in those situations where I had an employer who just didn't want to make that investment, and this is a nice little tool here to help you and to kind of portray the value of what you can do with MDM. MDM is going to give you obviously a lot more features than this and allow to zero touch deployments and stuff like that. Once you have your restriction payload and everything set, in this case, we're just going to be disabling the use of the camera. Next, we're going to save it. And I apologize for whatever reason my resolution up here isn't working out really well to be able to show the menu up here. I don't know why, but oh, there we go. So we're going to want to save this then. Oh. There we go. And I'm just going to call this camera restrictions. I'm going to save that locally on that Mac Mini that I have. The next step, I want to add that restriction into my blueprint because I might have 5 different blueprints that I'm pushing out. Maybe one for teenagers, maybe one for younger children. You don't want them to be able to use FaceTime, but maybe the teenagers you want them to. So there's different blueprints with settings that you could set up if you maybe don't want the device connecting to Wi-Fi or you want it on a certain Wi-Fi network. You could add that into that blueprint. So you're just going to right click on the blueprint, and then what you're going to do is you're going to add your profile in here for camera restrictions. And now that blueprint has those restrictions on it. Now, if you took a look here, when I went to add, you have the option to deploy apps as well. Apple Configurator 2 does support the volume purchase app program through Apple. And it is something that you could use, again, if you don't have MDM, you could deploy apps through the volume purchase program. Even free apps or paid apps can be deployed through here. It's something that I used in the past as well. I was able to get the company to sign up for VPP. However, again, they didn't want to pay for MDM. We were able to use this to push out the default set of apps that we wanted everybody to have pertaining to their blueprint. So, one thing when you hook up a device, you're going to see the option to prepare it, update it, and restore it. When you prepare the device, what you're doing is you're wiping the device, and it's going to push out that command to the device to wipe it and to supervise it and put it in that managed state. Once the iOS device is prepared, at that point, you could push out the blueprint to it. You won't be able to push out a blueprint. It's going to fail unless the device is prepared. When, sorry about that. If you're looking to update devices pretty rapidly, when you would plug the devices in, you would just want to hit either update or restore, depending if you're looking to wipe the device, start from scratch, or if you just want them to be mass updated at once. It'll download that package once on the computer, cache it on the computer, and then be able to push it out to all those devices without you having to download multiple times. So, yes?
I use this for wiping, so I use it in tandem. I use it in tandem with my MDM
Yeah.
to get it, for updates and everything. Activation lock. I haven't had success. Have you interacted with activation lock with configurator? Because you can log in your Apple ID and password and then have it kind of push that credential to all the iPads, which
Yeah.
would be a dream. But there I am just typing away on 44 iPads the Apple ID and password.
Yeah. So I've kind of had the same unsuccess with activation lock with Apple Configurator 2, and that's kind of where MDM prevails over Apple Configurator 2, and I've kind of leveraged that as well. Yeah, like he mentioned, this is a great tool for wiping devices, even if you don't want to push out those remote commands through your MDM, or you have a existing device that was maybe enrolled via user-initiated enrollment. Now you're looking to actually supervise that device and take care of getting those additional management capabilities on a device.
Or your APNS expired. You have to wipe every machine.
Or that. But Apple can help you with that. Takes knowing the right person, but they could definitely help you with the APNS certificate. Cool. So again, I just wanted to give a real brief overview on Apple Configurator 2. Again, it's a free application on the App Store. Download it, play around with it. It's something that you're going to love, even if you're already using MDM. It has a lot of great capabilities. The one thing that I was going to touch on it a little bit, but since I already have Apple Configurator 2 open, how many people are getting devices donated to them from PTOs or organizations, anything like that? So yeah, everybody gets devices donated to them. The cool thing is with Apple Configurator 2, you're able to provisionally enroll the devices into Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager. At this time, you cannot do that with a Mac, but you're able to do it with the iOS devices, which is great. Many people were super happy when Apple introduced that. It's something that I used a lot. Again, I had nonprofit organizations that wanted to donate 100 iPads that they bought through Costco to us. We wanted to take the capability of the zero touch, and being able to add those devices into our Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager was super awesome. So that's something to keep in mind. Cool. Any questions on Apple Configurator 2? I'll pass you the catch box.
And I can use Apple Configurator 2 to reset a device where they lost the passcode.
Yes and no. So when you're making the blueprint, what you want to do under advanced, you're going to tell it to save an unlock token. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow, if that person forgets their passcode down the road, as long as this device was supervised through Apple Configurator 2, if they come up to you and say, hey, I lost my passcode, what are you going to do for me? And most of the time, you're going to say, sorry, we have to wipe the device. You're going to lose everything. In this case, since the device was managed through Apple Configurator 2, you could hook the device up, and you're going to use that save unlock token feature. When you hook up the device, it's going to allow you to unlock that passcode from the device.
Okay, in this case, the device is owned by a school, and my wife's classroom inherited the thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and nobody even knows the Apple ID under which it was enrolled or set up or anything.
Okay. Do you have any kind of proof of purchase for the device?
I will assume no.
Okay. So in that case, that's a really sticky scenario, because Apple can unlock the device for you if you have proof of purchase. If the device was, let's say you don't even have an MDM and you're just using configurator, but say that somebody enabled activation lock on it and then they left, and obviously you don't want to have that awkward conversation with that employee who left to find out what their Apple ID is. You are able to pull up the device purchase information in Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager. When you pop into serial number, it'll give you the PO and order number, and then you can reach out to Apple Enterprise, and then you would open up a ticket with Apple Enterprise, and it would take a couple days for them to unlock that device once they had that proof of purchase. If you don't have a proof of purchase, unfortunately, that's the whole reason behind the activation lock on the Apple devices, is to prevent theft. So in those cases, yeah, you're kind of in a sticky situation there. And that's, again, Apple School Manager and Apple Business Manager are free. So it really doesn't take that much time to sign up for them. And in this case, when you're doing your yearly refreshes of these devices, provisionally enroll them through Apple Configurator 2 into Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, and then at that point, you'll be able to have that record on file there. Any other questions? You want to pass the box?
So what I run into is I have some Gen 2 iPads, and teachers have them. They have a passcode on. They're not using them. They let them die down. They hand back the iPad. They disappear for the summer. And of course, I charge it back up, and the iPad forgot the Wi-Fi network that it's connected to. So I can't use Jamp to unlock
Yeah.
the iPad.
Yeah, and that might be, again, you're able to add devices to MDMs like Jamf through Apple Configurator 2, or you could just use Apple Configurator 2 just to supervise the devices and put that save the unlock token on there. So that way, if you do run into something like that when you're doing your refreshes this summer, just run your devices through Apple Configurator 2, create a blueprint to save that unlock token. That way,
Okay.
when you have something like that, you could just hook up the device and say, yeah, here, I cleared the passcode, you're good to go.
Yeah, because I mean, in the past, it's usually I had to force reset it
Yeah,
and wipe it clean.
yeah, this'll definitely help you in those situations.
Okay,
Cool.
thanks.
Any other questions on Apple Configurator? Cool. At the end, I'll be around if anybody has any like one-on-one questions. You could definitely come up to me and we could go over that stuff. Cool. So again, we talked about the donated devices being added through Apple Configurator 2. One thing I want to touch on is the 30-day provisional period. So when you add the device, if somebody goes to settings, general profiles, they're going to see the MDM profile on there, and they're going to have the option to remove that for up to 30 days. After 30 days, they're not going to be able to remove that profile off of it. And again, this all goes back to visibility for the end user in the event that there's a shady IT person out there that might have wiped their device and somehow or another made it look exactly like what they had before. If they go into settings, general profiles, and they see that MDM profile, they could remove it. It'll unsupervise the device. They'll be back to where they were, and they'll be unmanaged. So is anybody using and this is a really bad practice, is anybody using a Apple ID to purchase applications and then using that Apple ID to sign in on multiple iOS devices? On macOS, okay. So in my consulting, I've run into various users who they're purchasing these paid apps for timekeeping or for truck driving logs and stuff like that, and they'll buy 10 of them at a time through one Apple ID, and then they'll let each person on that iOS device have their own Apple ID, except for in the App Store, they have to use that one Apple ID, and they have it signed in on multiple devices, and it's just super bad practice. And that's where, again, Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager, they're going to give you that ability to volume purchase applications, and not just paid applications. We're talking your free applications. If you have a secure texting application or Microsoft Outlook, or you want everybody to use Google Maps or Concur for expenses, you're able to go into the volume purchasing. Well, now it's called Apps and Books in Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager. You could purchase those applications even though they're free. You have the unlimited licenses that you could purchase those free apps, and then through Apple Configurator 2 or through your MDM, you're able to assign those licenses to your devices, and you don't even have to worry about that person having an Apple ID on a device, which prevents activation lock and all other kinds of fun stuff. So. Cool. So at the end of the day, when we have a shared iOS environment like this, we have pretty much two results. We want a fully functional, up-to-date iPad or an iPhone with the latest iOS, and we want the latest applications loaded on there for the school year or fiscal year, whatever environment you're in. And that desired end result kind of looks like this. We turn the device on, we go through the, there we go. Turn the device on, we select our language, we select our region, our network, we allow our MDM to give us our remote management. It's going to take us through that zero-touch deployment. It's going to do all the configuration in the background, connect us to our network. It's going to put all our apps on there, might hide some things that you don't want on there. It's going to say, hey, you need a passcode. Something you could do through Apple Configurator also is force a passcode, which is cool. We're going to put our initial passcode in here. It's going to put our real basic applications that we might want on a device. And then hopefully whatever MDM provider you're using has a self-service where you're able to provide that app store without having somebody to sign in with an Apple ID. Great example would be a science lab, chemistry lab. When I was at Lehigh, we had a chemistry iPad cart, had like 50 applications that they needed access to. The iPads were 32 gig iPads. Obviously, they couldn't have all those applications on it. We put the base apps on it that all the instructors needed. And then we used self-service for them to be able to download a dissecting a frog application or something like that. The big thing when you push out applications through self-service, you want to make sure that your MDM provider gives you the ability to remove that application. That way, let's say somebody comes up and there's no space left on a device, you could go into self-service and remove that application so you could gain that space back. And I'll touch on that in a little bit onto a solution for that as well. So we got a couple steps when we're setting up our iOS devices. The first thing is we're going to prepare them. Again, we're going to sign up for Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager. VPP's being sunsetted, and it's being rolled into those two services from Apple. And then you're going to want to figure out what you're going to do with your Apple IDs. Apple gave a great session on managed Apple IDs and federation. Obviously, we're all here in this session right now because we're probably not going to be using that, or we're just curious about this. So I'm not going to touch on things like that and shared iPad through Apple. This is really for our unique cases that we have here. So we're going to prepare our devices. We're going to enroll them in Apple Business Manager. We're going to get our applications purchased. And then we're going to set up our configurations, whether it be through our MDM or through Apple Configurator 2. And we're going to build out those profiles. We might push some email settings. We're going to push our apps out. And then we're going to deploy them. Now, obviously, in a perfect world, we all would just want to be able to hand over a device to somebody and be like, here you go. Call IT if you need help. But there's some scenarios where maybe IT has to give a little hand, especially in these unique scenarios where people might be sharing devices or multiple people are using them. They're getting refreshed every single day. We're going to use our MDM to manage the devices. So again, going back to the devices being supervised, we're going to be able to push out remote commands to them, whether it be an iOS device or even a macOS device. As long as the device is managed and supervised, we're going to be able to push out those remote commands to update the OS and allow the user to defer them up to 90 days. So that way people aren't running an older version of the OS. So one thing I'll definitely highlight is if you're looking to implement an iOS program in your organization, build a plan, get management involved. Anybody who's going to be using these devices, have a small team of IT folks and non-IT folks and be able to convey these ideas to them and be open and transparent with them. Let them know that you're not going to be sitting there watching everything that they're doing. You don't have the time for that. Nobody does. However, when things come up, like a missing device, you're able to send a command to that to remote wipe it. If somebody forgets the passcode, show them that value that they'll be able to walk that device over to you, and you'll be able to plug it into Configurator and remove that passcode from it. Or if you're using an MDM, you're going to be able to push out that remote command to it. And that's one thing I can't stress enough is being able to convey that value to people. Because the minute I'll say when I was at Lehigh and we were looking to roll out Jamf Pro, we had 6 college IT teams spanning the campus, and each team kind of had their own way of doing things, and maybe one team didn't want the devices managed in a certain way. But being able to get that framework in place on the devices for them to be managed with passcode and encryption took a lot of meetings with people and getting them to buy into that process of having IT manage their devices that before there was no management on. And self-service and the passcode and activation lock, those were the 3 talking points that I always highlighted. And usually I was able to sell people into having IT manage the devices kind of by showing those things to them. So I had a couple scenarios in higher ed, one of them being a loaner program where students were borrowing iPads and MacBooks, and then they would borrow it for anywhere from an hour to a couple weeks. And I needed student workers to be able to wipe those devices for me. And maybe I didn't want to give them access to Jamf Pro, or maybe they weren't tech savvy to be able to use Apple Configurator, but they knew how to use an iOS device. And that's where Jamf kind of, last October at JNUC, they announced Jamf Setup and Reset. Has anybody heard of Jamf Setup and Reset before? Okay, we got a few people. Is anybody using it? Okay, cool. Well, I hope next year when I'm here that we get a couple more hands for people using it. I'm in love with this product, and I will be straight up with you guys. This presentation I submitted before I started working for Jamf. So I've only been at Jamf a couple weeks now. But I was so passionate about how Jamf Setup and Reset helped me in higher ed that I wanted to bring this presentation here to you and convey the value of it to you guys, because it's free. As long as you're a Jamf customer, you could use these applications and deploy them through Jamf Pro. So I'm going to give a little overview of Jamf Setup and Reset. So there are two applications. Again, they could be deployed through the Apple purchasing programs, whether you're using Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager. If you go in the App Store, the apps are titled Jamf Setup and Jamf Reset. So with Jamf Setup, this is a great use case if you have multiple people using the device in a day. They're able to go up, pick their device, select their role, and the device will get configured with the settings and applications that you want on it for that particular role. At the end of their shift, they're able to select another role, go into that role, get those applications, or if you're utilizing Jamf Reset, you're able to reset the device, sanitize the device by wiping it, and Jamf Setup will open up, and they could go on into a new user role. So this is what Jamf Setup looks like. In this case on the screen, we're talking about healthcare, but Jamf Setup can be used in retail, hospitality, education, anything that you could think where multiple people are going to be using the device. You could use Jamf Setup and Jamf Reset. There's really no crazy possibilities I could think of a use case that you cannot use this for. Again, Jamf Reset, it's a user-initiated wipe. So as long as the person knows how to click on an app and hit reset twice, they're going to be able to take that IT headache away from you. So this is what it looks like. When you open up the app, somebody's going to go ahead and hit the reset button. They're going to confirm that they want to wipe the device and that they're going to lose everything on a device. And then it's going to do a nice wipe on the device. It's going to get rid of everything, and it's going to give you an out-of-box experience. And that's something that I'll convey with users who I provided Jamf Setup and Reset to. When I was able to hand them an iPad and get that out-of-box experience, it makes them feel like it's their device. It makes them feel like the creepy IT guy didn't put any kind of malware or any kind of tracking apps on it to be able to watch what they're doing, even though we know that's crazy. But that's real-world feedback that I got from users when they're using Jamf Setup and Reset, that they get that out-of-box, welcome to iPad, select your language. It makes them feel like it's their own personal device, even if they're just using it for a short period of time. So I'm going to go through a demo of Jamf Setup and Reset. So this is what the user would see when they would get that device. They would select their role, they'd hit submit, they would close out of the app, and then it's going to configure that device with the applications for that particular role. So if you see here, this particular role, they're getting the Epic EMR, they're getting Tonic Health for their medications, and Patient Touch for their clinical notes. But let's say that user is going to switch and they're going to go to transport and work a shift in transport for the afternoon. They could hit Jamf Setup, select transport, and it's going to change the background and change the applications on the device and allow that reset workflow to go into place. So again, these are free apps. They're available on the App Store. Before we go into questions, I would like to do just a short virtual demo of Jamf Setup and Reset. It's a little bit better to convey the message to you than in the PowerPoint. If anybody wants to demo along with me, if you open up Safari and you go to jamf.io, you'll be able to put yourself in the driver's seat and go through some of these workflows with Jamf Setup and Reset. Again, you could use it in healthcare, you could use it in education, retail. There's really no end for what you're going to use it for. I'm going to go over retail, just because I kind of focused on healthcare a little bit, but I'm going to do the retail experience. If you look, it brings up a nice little iPad demo here. That way we're able to click along. So this is going over a retail kiosk. So in my former role, I had a healthcare intake form kiosk that was set up with this. It worked out really good. Anything that you're using a kiosk for, it works great. So again, they're getting that out-of-box experience. It's going to configure it with Jamf Pro, or once the enrollment's complete, it's going to put any necessary applications on it. And then it might put it into the kiosk mode where it's in a single app mode and you can't do anything else that you'd want. In this case, nobody would be able to touch the device, even putting it, pressing the home button or anything like that. It's not going to allow them to do anything. So that's a great example for retail. For Jamf Setup, for staff, this might be a better example because it's on an iPhone. If you take a look, we're going to choose pharmacist for our role. And what it's going to do is it's going to configure it, and it's going to put that special background on for the pharmacist. And if you take a look here, they got the Epic EMR, they got a pharmacy app, and they got self-service for anything else that they need. Again, if they're at the end of their shift, and maybe they're going to be working overtime in another department, they could switch that role. And now they got teletracking to be able to track their transports. So again, it's real simple for it to configure. You're not waiting long periods of time because the applications are all living on the device. When the device gets provisioned, it's just being able to swap out those apps and those settings and those features in real time for somebody that might not need it. If you're at the end of the shift and you're going to reset it and you don't want any of your data on it, this is something great. If you're going to be implementing a program like this, bring it up in your meetings. Let people know that they have control over the device and they don't need to reach out to IT to have the device wiped or anything like that. They could do it themselves, and there's nothing better than empowering users to be able to take control of their IT and do it for themselves. It gives them a good feeling. So we're going to reset it. It's going to confirm. It's going to do a reset. Takes about a minute. Sped up a little bit here. In this particular demo here, it's not going through the setup assistant, but in our cases, it will be going through the setup assistant. They just shortened it for this little demo here. Any questions? Yeah. We got the catchbox? Cool.
So, with what's the name of? I'm sorry, I'm spacing on the name. The setup one, the apps remain on there, and when it's almost like putting a different profile in or logging in as a different user. If it was a Mac environment,
Absolutely.
There's the pharmacist user that has these apps already on the home screen. But when I assign it to to transport, I don't delete. I don't have to bring down those apps again.
Exactly. Yeah. So when the device goes through the reset process, it's going to bring all those applications down onto the device, and then that role decides whether or not they're going to get those applications, what background they're going to get, any other kind of restrictions that are going to be on the device.
It brings down the apps again.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It just displays
the
them.
apps are there. It just chooses what it's going to display.
It's like
Yeah.
a multi-phase key application.
Exactly.
Okay.
And like one thing in my use cases that I did was I actually Jamf setup got displayed when the device was provisioned, and then once you selected your role, so if you chose transport, Jamf setup would not appear there anymore, because in my case, I didn't want anybody's information getting transferred over to anybody else. In my cases, I didn't have any employees who were working multiple roles that needed access to those apps. So in my case, I just had Jamf reset there. Everybody was trained at the end of using the device, hit reset, boom, it's wiped, and we're good to go within 2 to 3 minutes. Does that answer your question?
That does, but
Cool.
follow up. So with reset, does that also, that actually removes the applications from the device and completely wipes the device, similar to just
Yep.
going into the settings
Yes.
on here? And
Yeah, it completely wipes and sanitizes the device so nothing's on there. And then again, you could hand that device to somebody, and I'll go over an example in a few minutes about a loaner program that I had like that. But in that case, you're able to just hand the device over to the person. They could go through the setup assistant themselves. It'll download the apps. Hopefully, we're all on a corporate network that has good speeds, and we're not
Yeah.
pushing out a million different apps and stuff like that. But yeah, for the most part, it's a pretty seamless process. Cool. You want to throw that back there?
Sure.
So when you do the reset, you're losing your Wi-Fi, so does it depend on you having a Wi-Fi these people know how to get onto?
Yeah, so it is dependent on you having a Wi-Fi connection. I've had a couple clients who they actually purchased. It's sold on the Apple website, but it's a Belkin Lightning to PoE adapter. So like they'll have a cart of iPads, and they'll have a couple of these PoE to Lightning adapters right there. So when it does go through that configuration, if there isn't Wi-Fi available and they're just using it offline or anything, to get that initial configuration, since the iOS devices require a network connection, at that check-in area, they just plug it into that adapter. It'll go through without Wi-Fi and activate. And just to reiterate, the Belkin Lightning to PoE gigabit network adapter, it's like $100. That thing is a lifesaver. You're really able to get devices configured quickly, especially if you're testing. Obviously, it's always better to have a hardwired connection. I love that adapter, so definitely look into that for your environment. Any other questions?
Okay, so I don't know how to phrase this. If it's wiping it possibly multiple times a day, if this is a heavily used device, wouldn't this wear down the read, write?
The cells.
Yeah, for SSDs.
Isn't it all preloaded and it's just switching? Because if it's
Well, so when you're going through setup, yeah, it's just switching what's displayed and what's not displayed. But yeah, I mean, with the wiping, that's, I guess that would be a concern. Again, this is an application that's out on the App Store, so Apple didn't see a problem with it, as well as our engineering team. Obviously, we're very Apple focused and Apple conscious, and we want to do what's right for everybody for Apple. So I haven't heard of a case like that. But if it's something that definitely concerns you, I would definitely reach out to Jamf support, and they could escalate that if that becomes a problem.
Are you referring to the old problem with SSDs about the limited times you can reuse a cell before it eventually dies? Yeah, I think that's more what's going on. So how many times can you safely wipe the iPad before the storage starts going bonkers?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. At the end, if you want to come up to me, I could definitely get a hold of some people on Slack and get an answer to that for you. Cool. Thank you.
Solid throw.
my question, since it's HIPAA, it's like health, can you lock it to Wi-Fi so it wipes itself when you leave networks in that case, or geofence it?
So with Jamf Pro, yeah, you can't do anything with geofencing, but you definitely, are you using Jamf Pro?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you could put the computer into a smart group where if it leaves a certain
Locks it down.
network segment or something like that,
sure.
it could do X, Y, and Z. Absolutely. That's a good question. Thank you. Cool. So I'm going to go into the use cases here. So let's say that you have a library and you're loaning out iPhones, or in most cases, probably iPads or iPods you're going to be loaning out. This is a great use case here where the student is maybe filling out a form to borrow the iPad. You hand the iPad over to them. The student themselves is going to go through the setup assistant, connect it to Wi-Fi. They use that loaner device, for however long that they need it. Jamf reset is on a device. There's no Jamf setup because it's just a loaner. But we want to empower that user to be able to have that reset option on there without hitting the reset button is a lot easier than going to settings and erase all content and settings. That's scary to some people and they might not know how to go in there. But if you have a nice, friendly reset button, that's something where in this particular use case, when they're done using it, they hit that before they hand it back and it gets checked back in, knowing that the device has been wiped. Nobody's going to have access to any of their data or their pictures, anything like that. Another one is education. So this is a project that I wrapped up about 6 months ago at Lehigh. There was a chemistry cart that had certain science applications on it. And the experience was essentially the student pulled the iPad from the shared cart. They selected the particular class that they were in. The iPad got configured with the base applications that were pertinent to that class. Again, iPads don't have unlimited storage. So in this case, I utilized self-service to be able to display the applications for that particular class in self-service. And if they needed another application, they could go in there, they could download it without an Apple ID because we volume purchased it. And then at the end of the class, the student hits reset, wipes the device, and it's ready for the next class. Higher ed is another use case that I worked on. It's something, if you were in my session yesterday, I touched on a little bit. At Lehigh, we had in the counseling and psychological services department, initially when a student was getting checked in, they were given a paper on a clipboard. They would answer some questions that were very, I'm trying to think of the term, very personal and confidential questions. So they got moved over to a computer and they were handed a big, bulky Dell laptop. And they would go and fill out the web form on the big, bulky laptop. And then we had to worry about the laptops going missing and people dropping them, and it just wasn't working out very well. So then they reached out to me for a better solution. I suggested they purchase iPads. The particular contact person in that department chose not to buy the iPads through our purchasing channel through Apple. He went out on Black Friday to Costco. He bought 20 iPads from Costco to save a couple bucks. And it was a nightmare because I wanted the devices to be in Apple School Manager. So this was a great use case for Apple Configurator 2 and provisional enrollment. So what I did was I enrolled those devices provisionally in Apple Configurator 2. I held them hostage for 30 days. That way, when I handed them back, they couldn't remove that profile off of them. And then actually, it worked out really well because what happened was when somebody would check out the iPad, they would have two icons on it. One of them was for the intake form, and the other one was for the questionnaire. It was like a survey on how often do you drink and stuff like that for college kids. So that worked great. And that was something that I was using up until November. Because when I went to JNUC in October, they announced setup and reset, and I was like, this is really cool. I'm going to bring this back and see what I could do for this. So then what I did was I started using setup and reset to really ensure that any information that was being submitted through those web forms, that nobody else was going to be able to see that if somebody copied something and somebody got the iPad an hour later, they weren't able to paste it back. It's just having that feeling that your data is protected. And that's something where Jamf Reset really helped, having that button on there. So somebody was just able to hit that button when they handed it back at the receptionist's desk. The device gets wiped and we're good to go. Now, some people might ask, what if I don't even want to touch the device at all? I don't even want to hit reset. And there's options out there. Anybody hear of the Apple provisioning utility? Okay. So it's something that's available through Apple, through the professional services. I have a slide here, right here. Essentially what happens is you purchase the professional services through Apple and they walk you through setting up everything. But the Apple provisioning utility, essentially you could have a hub or a cart, and when you hook that iOS device up to the hub or the cart, it's actually going to send an automated command, and it's going to kind of do what you want it to do. So if you don't want the user to go through the setup assistant and you want Wi-Fi to automatically connect and not have them to have to push which network they want to connect to, that can all be automated through the Apple provisioning utility. If you have any questions on it, definitely reach out to your AE or your SE from Apple. You could also email consultingservices@apple.com. I know they do rolling demos online and stuff like that. But if you're really looking to automate this entire process, Apple provisioning utility is something that could definitely help you out there. So one thing that I found super helpful with me for Jamf Pro, when I was a Jamf Pro customer, was having my own Playground dev instance. And it's something that a lot of people don't know that they could get access to. If you go to jamfnation.com, how many people have a Jamf Nation account? Cool. How many people are Jamf customers? Cool. So when you're on jamfnation.com, you want to go to My Assets. In My Assets, you'll see beta programs. And a lot of people get confused. They're like, oh, if I hit enroll, it's going to enroll my entire production instance in the beta program. No. Jamf has a separate release candidate program for people that want to participate in betas in their production environment. In this case, you're getting your own dedicated cloud instance that's separate from your production that you could toy around with and do whatever you want. The big thing with that is at the end of the beta cycle, that instance gets deleted. So again, it's really for playing around. You don't want to do anything production in there, but there's a lot of value. Again, I'm a big person. I don't like to do anything where I'm testing in my production instance in case something happens. So it's nice to have that playground. If you have any questions, reach out to Jamf support. But again, it's pretty easy. If you're on Jamf Nation, you'll be able to get access to the beta. So cool. I know we had a lot of great discussion and a lot of questions on Apple Configurator, Jamf Setup and Reset. Does anybody have any other questions?
I could be missing something, but does Reset have any other functionality beside
Just reset.
just Reset?
Yeah.
Literally, it just hits
Yeah.
a button and saves you from going into settings and.
Yeah. It saves people an extra little step there. So, and if you're using Apple IDs, you don't have to sign out of the Apple ID and all that fun stuff. So, cool. Any other questions?
Just to follow up on that, if you put a restriction in place that disables the reset or doesn't allow you to get to the reset, can the Jamf Reset app override that?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So you push out a payload through Jamf Pro to not allow them to reset the device.
Correct.
Yeah. Jamf. If you're using Jamf Reset, that'll override it.
Okay, great.
Cool.
And just to confirm on using the setup utility, Jamf Setup, whenever you swap over different ones, any data that's created inside of those is maintained through any sort of switch back and forth until you reset?
So no, so it's not like a separate profile. When you're going in there and you're selecting that different role, the data is still going to be intact there until you actually reset the device. When you're choosing that new role, all you're doing is saying which applications and which settings you want to be on a device at that point, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So not utilizing the reset really is not an option if you were just to say, hey, here's my driver, here's my nurse, here's my doctor,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, just to hand off without utilizing reset is not really a valid function.
And there's some applications where the applications are all strictly cloud-based, like EMRs and stuff like that, where or secure texting apps where there really is no data stored locally on the device, so that's not really a problem. But yeah, I mean that's a good question. You'd want to use reset if any kind of confidential information like that. And the nice thing when you're using reset, I mean, you're not talking about a full restore on a device that's going to take several minutes. It's really 1 to 2 minutes, and the device is back where it should be.
Yeah, like for office apps, there people are logged in, it's like we're logging out.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And definitely implementing something like this, it's a little bit of a culture change. There's going to be a little bit of maybe training or communication with management about how things work like this. But yeah, absolutely, those are all great questions.
How does the Apple ID work on the shared devices again? I know you kind of explained this, but
I'm sorry, how does that?
how does the Apple ID work again on some of the shared devices? Like you mentioned, like if it's a checkout device type thing.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. So, for like the loaner program, is that what you're talking about?
Like if we were using it in like say a library or something like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, are you using Jamf Pro or another MDM?
We're getting into it right now. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm assuming that those devices that you're gonna use automated enrollment through Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that case, the devices will be supervised, and when you initiate that wipe, it's going to disable the activation lock for you. So since you're going to be getting that remote management screen when you wipe the device, if somebody sign in with an Apple ID, it's going to just automatically take you to that remote configuration page. You're not going to have to worry about the activation lock.
Sure.
Cool. Any other questions? Everybody enjoying the conference? Cool. So if anybody has any questions, I put my contact information up here. Again, I'm new to Jamf. I can't convey enough. This isn't a sales pitch for Jamf or anything like that. This is me being passionate and just wanting to share this information with you. I'm available on Slack, adam.derrick. If you have any other questions, feel free to come up or reach out to me. I'll be here today and tomorrow.